right. Hello, everyone. Can you all see and hear me without any problems? Very good. Okay. How y'all doing? Let's share my screen. I'm sitting at a different spot with a high chair and a low table. Perspective feels weird. Um, anyway, today we're going to finish our discussion on freedom of the will. And our slides are not super intense today. So who knows? We might even finish a little bit early. Oh, on my computer? Yeah, that's I don't know what wallpaper that is. It's some kind of astronomy wallpaper. I love astronomy. Astronomy, I think, was my first love before I found philosophy. And astronomy remains very, very cool. So I love to keep uh, up to speed on all things astronomical. Last quiz next Thursday. Yeah, so okay, that's actually good that you bring that up, Galen. So the last quiz is going to be like the others. It'll be open for a period of time. Because the last day is Thursday, that's actually the last day of the term. So I don't think I can keep it open until Friday, although I will check. Um, but if the last day of the term is indeed Thursday, then the quiz will be due by 11:59 p.m. on Thursday. And you're probably wondering, okay, so what if there's something we haven't covered, um, or that we only cover that day? Well, we should be okay, right? We're going to finish free will today. Then we're going to start the final chapter, which is on the nature and existence of God. We'll start that Thursday, finish it next Tuesday, and then next Thursday is just going to be kind of like a wrap-up class. Um, and the quiz will probably be similar in structure to previous quizzes. Okay, so a little bit of recap. Last time, what did we do? Well, we talked about a few different metaphysical positions that one could take concerning freedom of the will. So, of course, there's libertarian free will, um, which you can think of as a sort of incompatibilist view. Free will is not compatible with the deterministic universe, um, and we are free. Like just metaphysically, we're the kinds of beings that are free. So perhaps that's because we have souls, right? And our souls aren't causally constrained the way um, physical processes in the universe are. And you might say, well, isn't that still a deterministic universe? Well, not really, because there's something in the universe that is not determined, and that's us, right? So that's libertarian free will. And by the way, it doesn't mean that we have to be free all of the time for us to have freedom of the will. Just that we have to be free some of the time. Some of the time, we have been able we have to have been able to have acted otherwise. Blech, that's a mouthful right there. But that's what it means to be free, right? We could have done otherwise, at least some of the time. And then we talked about determinism, hard determinism. Again, a sort of incompatibilism where free will is incompatible with a deterministic universe, but we are determined, so we don't have free will. We're determined just as much as all of the other physical happenings are. We're determined by the laws of nature and prior circumstances. We did the exercise with Laplace's demon to exercise this. And then there's a middle ground, which we talked about briefly, compatibilism. And that's the idea that free will is compatible with a deterministic universe. So on compatibilism, we're free to the extent that where when we act in ways where we're unconstrained or uncoerced, and our reasons for acting are our own, like they originate within us, then we're free, right? And that gets us the kind of agentive sense of free will that we want. And we finished off with some discussion on Benjamin Liebei's interesting studies with the readiness potential, where he saw that brain activity, unconscious brain activity, we should note, in the premotor and motor areas precedes the conscious intention to act. Of course, Liebe didn't think this means we don't have free will, right? He believes in this conscious veto. Um, and of course, I think this is nicely captured by um, Richard Gregory's pun. He said, "We don't have free will, but we do have free won't." I think that nicely captures um, the picture painted by not just Liebe's experimental results, but how he interprets those results. Now, let's talk about indeterminism. Last time when we were talking about Laplace's demon, that's a thought experiment that's still situated very much within the framework of classical physics, which is very deterministic, very mechanistic, kind of like it gives us a picture of the world akin to that of the sort of billiard ball causation I've talked about before, right? Where say on a pool table, you're playing a game of pool and you strike the cue ball with the cue stick, which strikes the eight ball, which rolls into the corner pocket, right? A causes B causes C. And everything is kind of determined, right? Um, it's the laws of physics, the prior conditions, and your striking of the cue ball that determines what's going to happen. But that's a very classical way of looking at it. Quantum physics is a relatively newcomer on the scene, beginning around the beginning of the 20th century. Now, quantum physics deals with stuff that's very small. So we're talking about what happens on like the atomic or subatomic levels, not what happens in this sort of middle world that we inhabit. And quantum physics seems to paint a somewhat indeterministic picture of the world. So, for example, here is this image is of, I believe, a double slit style experiment. So, um, there's this notion of in quantum physics of indeterminacy, quantum indeterminacy, where we can know certain things when we observe events that happen at this level, but not other things. So, for example, I could know the direction of a particle, but not the spin. Or I could know the spin of a particle, but not the direction, because measuring it affects the system, and it seems to do so randomly. Or you can think like here, like this picture illustrates. Think of this along the lines of like a double slit experiment or Schrodinger's cat. Actually, let's do Schrodinger's cat. You've probably heard of Schrodinger's cat. It's a thought experiment conceived of by Erwin Schrödinger. Are we familiar with this, or shall we kind of run through the example? I guess we'll run through it, um, just in case. I mean, I'm sure it's something people have heard of. Yeah, to prove it's kind of silly. Well, it's to prove it's kind of absurd, right? It's absurd at the level at this level of reality. But the idea is that you have a cat um, in a box, and in the box is also some poison. which will get released depending on whether a little bit of a radioactive element decays. It has a 50-50% chance of decaying by the time you open the box. So, um, now the thing is, it's meant to illustrate the a little sort of something about the what we call the observer effect, rather like the double slit experiment. Um, we don't know. Um, Not only do we not know if the cat is dead or alive by the time we open the box, because we need an observer in order to collapse the wave function and you know, uh, it's not just a matter of seeing what happens, but on this interpretation of quantum mechanics, the state needs to be observed. And before it's observed, the cat is both dead or alive with equal probability. Um, the point I want to emphasize is that it's random, right? Whether the cat is dead or alive, because the decay process of that little radioactive isotope that determines whether the poison gets released is also a random process. Um, Same thing with the double slit experiment. Forget about the observer stuff. We could just have two slits and we could shoot photons at the slits. Um, and it'll go through one or the other. If it's being observed, if we're trying to measure it, it'll go through one slit or another, but we have no way of knowing which one it's going to go through. So this is a pretty, it seems like there's a lot of weird random stuff happening at the quantum level. Some people appeal to this randomness to save us from determinism, but does it really save us from determinism? Not really. Um, if my behavior is determined by prior conditions and the laws of nature, you might find that a pretty unnerving possibility. Or I should say, if your behavior is determined by the laws of nature and prior conditions, then you're just like you're no different than any other bit of the physical universe. Even though you feel free, you're determined. But what if you're not determined? What if everything is ultimately random? Are you free then? Well, no. You're because you're still not an agent, right? Your behavior isn't determined. It's random now, but there's still no agency there. So that's a problem. Uh, well, yeah, Khalid, like the issue is, yeah, like you say in your comment, randomness does not equate to control. Um, like imagine you're determined on the one hand. Your whatever happens in your brain that's giving rise to your thoughts, all your beliefs, desires, intentions that you feel like are yours, like, oh, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. I decided to do that. Well, no, really, that was determined, say, by prior conditions and the laws of nature. So in this case, we're talking about physiological conditions. I'm thirsty, I'm a little sleepy, I need some coffee. I see a coffee there, and that causes unconscious activity in my brain, which I've eventually become aware of. I think I'm the one who initiated the action, but it's all determined. That's pretty scary, but just replace that with a sort of randomness generator in the brain. Um, you're still not an agent, you know. And every once in a while, this randomness generator might say, "Oh, take a sip of coffee now," and I might feel like I'm the one initiating that action, but it's just this random sort of dice roll, right? So, it's it. We're still missing the agency. Let's go back to the chat. Right, but well, I think I can. That could just be an illusion. But for the purposes of this example, um, I'm trying to illustrate that randomness is not any better than determinism. So if things are ultimately random, as I say on this last point, we still don't have what we're looking for. Robert Kane counters by saying that maybe our different options that we decide between correlate with quantum indeterminacy. So, like, like Yusuf said, maybe I'm thirsty and I can decide to drink or to decide not to drink. Maybe those two decisions actually map onto the possible outcomes. Um, so if that were true, the outcome that we pick is in some sense random, but it's not arbitrary because we select the outcome based on reasons. Um, and these choices over the course of one's life are what form your character. And if you embrace that character, then you're free. So this would be like, again, think back to Schrodinger's cat. If the options are dead or alive, maybe in some sense, what's going on in the brain is that by making decisions, I'm opting for one outcome over another. And even though the possible outcomes are random, um, my selecting of one, uh, well, it's funny that he says it's not arbitrary. It is arbitrary in the sense that I have arbited, I have made a decision, but it's not random. Like the decision is not random. Um, do you understand? Does that make sense? I personally think that this is a bit of a reach, and I do not think it is at all clear that the brain works this way. So while it's an interesting way of, I guess, saving agency from quantum randomness, I don't know how plausible it is. Mhm. Well, what I'm saying is that there are po a number of possibilities that are random, owing to the fundamental sort of randomness and that randomness that's inherent in the quantum level. But maybe what's happening is that when we make a decision, we're actually selecting what happens from these random possibilities. And that's freedom in a sense. That's Kane's point. Well, again, I don't really think this is plausible because I don't think it's very clear that the brain actually works this way. See, the thing about quantum physics is it gets invoked a lot when we try to explain um, things like free will or consciousness. And to me, that's really just replacing one mystery with another because nobody really understands why quantum physics works the way it does. So we don't understand free will, we don't understand consciousness. What do you gain by saying maybe it's quantum? Nothing. Um, you're just swapping one mystery for another. Yeah. Yeah, like Galen says, no one understands. Like I think Richard Feynman says something like, you know, even quantum physicists don't understand quantum physics. Like it's very weird. It just we have the tools, the mathematical tools for explaining and predicting, but why reality is like this, it doesn't make sense to us. Yeah, the many words theory, many worlds is not very parsimonious, right? Like if anything violates Occam's razor, it's the many worlds interpretation. But maybe the problem is actually to do with levels of analysis. So, um, this is a notion that I'm borrowing from the cognitive sciences. You can try and explain things at various levels of analysis, very small, sort of fine-grained level of analysis, or perhaps a very large level of analysis. I mean, um, like I said before, quantum physics deals with things that happen on a very small scale very quickly. Um, Newtonian physics deals very well with the world that we inhabit, a sort of middle world where, if I want to explain the motions of the billiard balls on the pool table, I don't need quantum physics. I can use classical physics. If I want to understand how very, very massive things behave or very, very fast things behave, like what happens if I approach a black hole or what happens if I approach the speed of light, then I need to use relativity theory. Um, and another problem with all of this is that we don't know how to reconcile these two, right? We don't know how to unify quantum physics and special and general relativity. And one does not work where the other works. Quantum physics doesn't work for the very big and the very fast. Relativity doesn't work for the very small. So these are all different levels of analysis. You can think of the most fine-grained level of analysis as quantum physics. Then there's classical mechanics, and then the very, very, very big stuff that's relativity theory. What am I? I'm a compatibilist. Yeah. So the problem here could be to do with what level we're using. At the quantum level, things appear indeterminate. Um, but maybe at the micro level, things appear determined, or even, um, at the macro level, perhaps. Maybe at the level of the mental, if there is such a level of analysis, mental properties emerge from more fundamental properties. Now, if this is the case, then our freedom of the will would be what we call an emergent property. So would our other mental states as well. So what is an emergent property? An emergent property is a property that emerges, a complicated property that emerges out of the interaction of like simpler parts with simpler properties. So let's try and come up with some examples of emergent properties. Uh, One of my favorites is murmuration. Do you guys know about murmuration? It's got something to do with birds. I'll see if any of you would like to volunteer this knowledge in the chat. Or fish. Have you ever seen a flight of birds where all the birds seem to move the same way at once? Yeah, more complicated. It is like a formation of flight, Khalid, but I would say it's a bit more complicated than, say, for example, the geese that you see migrating south right now, where they fly in a V. Like that's a kind of formation. But what I mean is like think of a flock of um, smaller birds, starlings, for example. Starlings will do this. And the whole flock kind of moves as one and it darts about, but it's like all the birds know what to do at almost the exact same time. Schools of fish do this too, right? So this is called murmuration, and the behavior of the entire flock or the entire school is super complicated, but it's generated out of a couple of very, very simple sort of rules that each bird is following. It's basically, keep such and such a difference, such and such a difference from the bird in front of you. Um, Turn the way the bird in front of you turns. Unless there's food, then maybe go over and get the food, right? And there's these simple rules that each bird is following that generates this complicated, almost coordinated looking behavior. That's an emergent property. The murmuration of such a flock of birds would be an emergent property. It's complexity emerging out of simplicity. So maybe what's happening here is that mental states are actually emerging from the simpler interactions of neurons, for example. And maybe our freedom of the will emerges out of a system which, on a very, very small level, looks indeterminate, and on a slightly larger level, looks determined. But maybe out of all of these interactions, a property emerges which is not itself determined by what's going on in the system. Um, Almost. I mean, I would say that it's like offloading. Like imagine you had to, you're a bird and you had to do it all in your head, right? To keep like, imagine you're like a bird, but you have to do it how those jet pilots do it when they're flying in formation, and you have to monitor all of this stuff going on around you, and you have to keep track of where everybody is, and you have to remember the flight plan, and that's a lot to keep in your head, especially if you're a bird. But if all you need to do is say, keep such and such a different distance from the birds around me while following the bird in front of me, that's a lot less that you have to do. That's a lot less that you have to keep in your head. It's offloaded into the world. So it's kind of like a hive mind in the sense that all of the birds are offloading some of their cognition into their environment amongst the other birds. It's not like telepathy or anything like that. It's just that by following these simple rules, the birds can do something that if it were all in one's mind would just be computationally ridiculous. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, if you want to check this out, there's something you can look up. I'm gonna type it in. Look up the Boyds. Boyds, like birds, but with a Brooklyn accent. Like, oh, look at those Boyds. Look up the Boyds. They're like a computer version of this. And this is actually how swarms are animated in video games and in movies. They're animated with a set of simple rules, like the rules that govern the behavior of the boids. Now, the boids mimic murmuration in birds or schooling behavior in fish. So look it up. I've spelt it out here in the chat, and that'll give you an idea. Um, Ian says, I got a game called Particle Life. You just apply basic physics properties to a bunch of particles, and eventually the interactions form complex and lifelike. And yeah, okay, so that's emergence right there. That's emergence. You can also check out The Game of Life by John Connington, I think his name was. Check out The Game of Life. It's not like the board game that you play, but rather, you create these sort of simple automata in a little 2D environment, but they change and interact with one another and evolve. Conway, okay, Conway, yeah. John Conway's. So check out The Game of Life and check out Boyd's, and you'll get an idea about emergence. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we're looking for causation in the wrong place. We've been talking about event causation, right? Events causing other events, etc. But maybe we should see free acts as a result of agent causation, not event causation. That's Roderick Chisholm's argument. And agent causation is something that we can all do, and it's distinct from event causation. So again, event causation would be like, the cue ball striking the eight ball rolling into the corner pocket. Agent causation is my decision to hit the cue ball with the cue stick in the way that I decide to do so. So for Chisholm, we have our agents, right? People, persons, selves, um, beings who act on the basis of reasons. They're the causes of agentive actions. So if an agent acts and their actions are not caused by any other event, then then that's agent causation. And moreover, if I haven't been coerced or constrained, and my actions originate from within me, then my actions aren't determined because I could have done otherwise. O'Connor follows this line of thinking as well. Event causation is really like a power that objects have to causally affect other objects, and that's governed by the laws of nature. But agent causation is more like an emergent power, emergent in the sense that we were just discussing. It's a power which these intelligent agents like ourselves possess. So it's a different kind of causation. It's almost like we're playing by a different set of rules. Um, and some people think this is just a little bit too mysterious, so they object to this line of thinking. This is called the mystery objection. Like, oh, I'm free to have done otherwise because I'm an agent, and the things that I cause, well, those are examples of different sorts of causation than, physical happenings. Okay, buddy, how does that work? Well, I don't know. Just does. Um, you can see why some people would object to this. Of course, I'm not trying to be uncharitable here. Um, this view is pretty similar to my own view, actually. But, um, you've got to acknowledge there's still something to be explained. If, okay, so how is it that agentive causation is different from um, physical causation or event causation? That's something that needs to be explained. Okay, now it's time to talk about compatibilism. How are we doing for time? Wow, we're doing really good for time, actually. We're almost done these slides. Does anyone have any questions so far? I don't want to finish too early, just in case people have questions. Well, something in the chat here. Maybe someone's got a question for me. Yusuf says, yeah. Okay. Yeah, there is a question, or you didn't understand the previous slide? Okay. Okay, let's talk about that. So basically, the idea is there's two different kinds of causation, right? There's event causation, which is the sort of causation we're talking about when we're talking about physical happenings. So, think of the billiard balls, or think of a line of dominoes falling over, or like, do you guys know what a Rube Goldberg machine is? Yeah. Okay, Jacob, you want to tell us about the Rube Goldberg machine? Yeah, it's like it could be just a really complex contraption where one thing causes the next thing to happen. Think of, you see these videos on YouTube actually. Like maybe somebody sets a marble rolling down a slope and then it hits a bunch of dominoes and the dominoes tumble over and the last one falls on a little catapult, which launches another marble, which causes something else to happen, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hmm. Those are events, right? And that's one kind of causation. But a different kind of causation, a sort of special kind of causation, is agent causation. And that's the power that we all have to act on the basis of reasons. Um, and the idea, and this is especially I think O'Connor's point of view primarily is that um, agent causation is an emergent causal power. So we're able to affect the world in a different kind of way, in a more or less, at least sometimes undetermined way, because our causal powers as people um, are an emergent property. And emergent properties, remember, are like complicated properties that emerge out of simpler interactions. So again, to go back another step, although it looks like the physical events in the brain are determined, the mind is an emergent property. The mind emerges out of those interactions and is not determined by those interactions. And so agent causation is kind of special. Thanks, Galen. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Let's share that to the Discord server as well. But you'll get the idea. Another, I think there's a band called OK Go, and in a couple of their music video, they always have the really crazy music videos where they do really interesting stuff. But they do one with a Rube Goldberg machine that's pretty neat. So check that out. If you go on YouTube and you search OK Go, you'll see an example of a Rube Goldberg machine. Actually, Galen, I think I know the video that you've shared there, actually, now that I think about it, but I'll double check later. Okay, so does that make sense? Are we a little more clear on this notion of agent causation? Okay, and now let's talk about compatibilism. So, hard determinists don't see free will as being compatible with a deterministic universe. That's why we call them incompatibilists. But compatibilists say that free will is compatible with the deterministic universe. And some philosophers we've looked at anticipate this position. Thinkers like Aristotle and David Hume. Um, William James also discusses it, but he called it soft determinism. And James also, I should point out, was not a compatibilist. Now, Jonathan Edwards uh, explains compatibilism thusly. He believed that our actions are caused, but we're still free. How are we still free? Well, it depends on his notion of free will. And for Edwards, free will is, quote, the power, opportunity, or advantage that anyone has to do as he pleases. Or in other words, his being free from hindrance or impediment in the way of doing or conducting in any respect as he wills. So our will is caused, but it's caused by our motives. It's caused by our choices. Um, and as long as we're not hindered or coerced or constrained in some way, we're free. Edwards actually thought that this is a kind of freedom that we have, which distinguishes us from, mere machines like automatons, right? Automatons, basically clockwork robots, um, could behave in all kinds of interesting ways, but their behavior was completely determined because they were clockwork mechanisms. Um, but we're different, right? We can act on the basis of reasons. Our actions are caused, but they're caused by our own um, motivations, our own decisions. Sort of causal interaction between mental states, as we'd put it in today's vernacular. Yeah, so that's a good question, Khalid. In those cases, you're not free. But remember, in order to have free will, not every decision has to be free, just some of them, right? So if I'm coerced to do something, then in that situation, I'm not free. But I am the kind of being that can be free. Or even if like I have OCD or something, um, maybe some of my compulsive behaviors are, they're compelled quite literally because I have a mental illness, right? But I can also make the decision to seek treatment. So even though those particular compulsive behaviors are, I'm not free when it comes to those, there are other instances when I would be free. So again, you don't have to be free all the time, but at least some of your actions must be free. And a lot of contemporary compatibilists look at this the same way that Edwards did. Freedom is really a matter of freedom from compulsion, not the absence of a cause. So, like my picking up this coffee cup, that action is caused, right? I have mental states that interact to produce behavior. I like coffee. I desire coffee. And I believe there's coffee right there. So I will take a sip. I need an example of an action to perform. I could have picked up my phone, but instead I picked up the coffee cup, right? So, my action is caused by the interaction of certain beliefs and desires and other mental states to produce behavior. But it's free because I'm free from compulsion or coercion. Nobody's got a gun to the back of my head saying, take a sip of that coffee now, right? Um, so my action is the result of my decision. My decision is caused, but it's mine. And that's what makes it free. And that is compatibilism. So you might notice there's an emphasis here on rational deliberation, right? An emphasis on acting on the basis of reasons. This is the exact thing that we don't have when we're compelled to do something. And some examples that we find um, in Crumley and also some that I've added, imagine, maybe somebody who has kleptomania, steals objects, not because they've made um, a decision to do so. They don't have a rational basis for their actions. They're just compelled to do that. So, kleptomaniac is not free, I would say. Um, as you put it in the chat a moment ago, right? Someone with OCD, maybe they can't help performing some specific behaviors before they do something. Like before leaving the house, they've got to lock and unlock the door a certain number of times. That's not a result of rational deliberation, right? So we wouldn't say that somebody like that is free, at least in that case. Those actions are not free. Or imagine you've got a class on campus, but you're late. Your bus broke down, or the weather was bad. Well, I'm not going to hold you responsible for that, right? If there's a snowstorm and I make it to class and no one else makes it to class because of the snowstorm, well, I can't really be mad about it. Maybe a mad scientist puts a chip in my brain that makes me do something every time she pushes a button. Maybe whenever she pushes that button, I say the word pickles. My screaming of the word pickles is not something I do on the basis of reasons. It's just because I've got a chip in my brain that zaps the right neurons whenever this mad scientist pushes the button. And robbing a bank because I've been coerced, right? There's enough of these examples. We don't need to go through all of them. The first two examples, right? The kleptomaniac and the person with OCD, these are what we would call examples of internal compulsion. So they're sort of compelled from within because there's a disorder of some kind. right? A disorder of the mind. The other examples are examples of external compulsion. So, if I'm late because of some reason that is external to me, or um, because a mad scientist is pushing a button, or if I'm robbing a bank because some criminal organization is threatening to kill my family if I don't do it, I'm being compelled by forces outside of me. In the first two examples, I'm being compelled by forces within me. So that's why we make this distinction between internal and external compulsions. But on compatibilism, your actions, if they are to be free, cannot be compelled. Your actions are just those um, actions that you perform on the basis of reasons, or that you've deliberated over, and that you're uncoerced. When you make those actions, you're uncoerced. Any questions? Okay. Now, some critics would say, hey, this doesn't really sound like choosing to me. It doesn't sound like I'm all that free. Sure, my reasons for acting are mine, but they're still caused, right? To recap, like if I choose to pick up the coffee cup and take a sip, as I've just done, I did that, um, because I'm acting on the basis of reasons, right? Beliefs and desires. I desire coffee. I believe there's coffee in front of me. I believe that I can satisfy my desire by taking a sip of coffee, etc. So I own that action. Um, the action originated from within me, and it was uncoerced. Um, And sure, it was caused by my beliefs and my desires, but these beliefs and desires were determined by prior events, by the laws of nature. And if that's right, then there isn't really a sense in which I could have done otherwise. So there's a worry there that I'm still ultimately determined because I could not have done otherwise, even though the reasons why I undertook the action were mine. But a compatibilist could respond to this by saying that we're still free to have done otherwise because the agent would have done otherwise had she chosen to do so. This is something that we call the ability analysis of can. Um, it kind of reminds me of, all of this, not just this last point, this last response to the criticism, but all of this talk of compatibilism reminds me a lot of what Schopenhauer said. And this is actually a different translation than what we get in the book. But the translation that I read is man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. So I'm free within a certain, sort of area. I can choose to have coffee or tea or water, but I cannot choose not to drink anything. I cannot choose to drink motor oil, right? Like I have a choice, but it's kind of limited. Um, any questions? Could I drink it once? Motor oil? I wouldn't recommend it. Uh, I don't know. I'm not that kind of doctor, but I certainly wouldn't try. Sure. Yeah, maybe I would die, but yeah, yeah, Yusuf, good point. We're assuming that our people are rational, right? Somebody who's not only acting on the basis of reasons and uncoerced, but also that they are like a rational person. They're not crazy, right? Or mistaken. Yeah, I suppose you could, but then you're not going to drink anything else, right, Galen? You're going to be dead. So, Harry Frankfurt said that free will isn't really a matter of escaping determinism, but it's actually a matter of acting on those desires that you want to have. And Frankfurt distinguishes between two kinds of desires, first order and second order. Now, what we should do, according to Frankfurt, is try and act upon second order desires as opposed to just first order desires, or at least first order desires that um, we would wish to change, right? Um, so, like, maybe I really want that slice of cake in the fridge. That's a first order desire. Like, oh, I would just love to eat that cake. But I have a second order desire, which is a desire to eat less cake. So, which one do I act on the basis of? Well, that first order desire is tough, right? Because that cake is loaded with sugar and fat, and my primitive brain is just like, eat that cake. We need that cake. We need it to survive. But my second order desire says, well, no, I desire to not do that so much. So I'm not going to eat the cake because I desire to eat less cake. If I act upon the second order desire, which is the desire that I want to have and act on, then I'm free, as opposed to giving in to my, baser appetites. Kind of reminds me of Plato, right? And, his tripartite soul, right? We have an appetitive soul. That's the part of soul that's like, eat that cake. But um, if I act upon a second order desire, like if I desire that I should desire less cake or desire that I should eat less cake, and I act upon that desire, that's the rational soul governing the appetitive soul. It's just like his chariot analogy, where the rational soul is the driver of a chariot and the horses are the emotions, the passions, and the appetites. Mm, I still wouldn't recommend. It might not kill you. It might make you very sick, right? I think this is the last one. Yeah. So if you're a compatibilist, it doesn't matter so much that your choices are determined. It matters what they're determined by. Trumpet valve oil looks edible. Yeah, don't. Even like olive oil, if you drank a whole bunch of olive oil, you could get very, very ill. So don't be doing that. Um, okay, so if you're a compatibilist, sure, your choices are determined, but what matters is that your choices are determined by an agent's will, insofar as your actions are voluntary and uncoerced. They might not be undetermined, but if they're uncoerced, if they're voluntary, if your reasons for acting are yours, you are free. And maybe compatibilism can help us save the notion of moral responsibility from hard determinism. I mean, compatibilists would say that it does. And now, we kind of come back to this idea that, it matters when we're assigning moral responsibility, like when we're praising or blaming somebody for something that they've done, the reasons they did what they did matter or should matter. Um, think of the sleepwalking guy, right, who killed one of his in-laws that we talked about last time. If that had been like a premeditated murder, um, he would have been charged with murder. But he was found not criminally responsible because he was literally not consciously aware of what he was doing. Um, let's go to the chat here. Yeah, not the intention. I mean, because remember, intentionality in this class is a technical term. But the reasons, I would say the reasons why you acted matter, right? Like, and this has happened plenty of times with my pets, right? Where I accidentally step on someone's tail, my dog or my cat, and I always feel terrible about it. Um, but it's not like I intended to step on uh, the tail of my cat or my dog, right? If somebody was going around stomping on poor little tails of, like the tails of poor little puppies and kittens, we would hold them responsible. We would be, I think, righteously angry at such a person. Causing harm to these poor little creatures. But if it's an accident, we understand that it's an accident, and um, we don't evaluate the situation the same way, right? Another one, like imagine that I park right in front of the door at a convenience store, and in so doing, I accidentally foil a robber who's going in there to try and rob the place. But I only did that because I'm in a hurry, because I'm selfish. Like I park right in front of the doors, run out of the car and buy something. Okay, maybe I've stopped or at least delayed the robbery, but I don't really deserve any praise for that because that wasn't my intention. Um, um, Intention matters. Not intentionality, but intention. One's intentions matter when it comes to assigning moral responsibility for something good or bad. So if my reasons for acting are part of what bring about the cause of something good or bad, then I could be praised or blamed or punished. I'm held morally responsible. But if it's an accident or a mere happening, I might be held responsible, but probably to a lesser degree. So yeah, maybe compatibilism can help us save free will. I don't know. What do you think? I'm personally speaking, I am a happy compatibilist. I am fine if my actions are caused, that's fine. As long as I'm the cause, I'm okay with that. And that's all I have for you today. So we finished off the second last chapter of the book, and next time we'll be talking about the final chapter. That's chapter 11, God, Nature, and Existence. I guess I'll give you a little bit of a preview. What we're going to do is follow Crumley pretty closely and look over some divine attributes. So, various characteristics that not only religious thinkers, but philosophers generally attribute to God. Um, things like omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and so on. Then we're going to talk about some arguments for the existence of God. So that'll be the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, and the ontological argument. And then we'll talk about the problem of evil and how there are a couple versions of this problem, and one of them, at least on Crumley's view, I think both of them pose a problem for belief in God, but one of them, the evidential problem of evil, we'll see, seems to pose a bit of a problem. And that is what we will do. Oh, super. Oh, you'll definitely find it helpful. And it's a fun way to end. It's a fun way to end the course because it's like a big question, right? It's one of them big questions. Your proposals, so we're trying to get those done for like the last day of class. Like we're trying to get them done by next Thursday, and then you'll have like if we can get them done before then, we will. But that's the latest we want to have them done, and then you have the exam period to write the paper. And remember, the papers don't have to be like that long. The idea is that you can take your feedback that we give you and then turn the proposal into like the start of your paper. So by the time you've done that, then you'll have like a third of your paper done. And the paper only needs to be 1,200 or so words. So it's almost a challenge because the papers are so short. You don't really have a lot of space. I think we'll have covered all of the material by the end of Tuesday's class. Well, you rewrite the proposal based on our feedback, so that it becomes the introduction to your essay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, then I guess do, I could, uh, I could make it due Friday then, Natalie. So that's what I'll do. So that way you'll have the whole week or the whole work week. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I guess we'll wrap up and I'll see you on Thursday, where we'll start talking about the nature and existence of God. Should be fun. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Have a nice day, everyone.